afternoon, and thank you for joining us on Across the Fence. I'm Jolie Whitney. It's the fourth Wednesday of the month, which means it's time for Bird Notes. Joining us is bird expert and conservation biologist for Audubon Vermont, Mark LaBarr. Thank you for coming in.
Always great to be here.
We're happy to have you. And before we actually get into our conversation about Bird Notes this month, I want to tell our viewers if they missed last month because they were taking in some Christmas cheer, we were actually on location at Green Mountain Audubon Center, and we talked about bird feeders and bird feeding. In case you missed it, here's a clip of me and Mark talking tech. So do you need top tech to enjoy bird feeding?
You do not. A window and a bird feeder, that's how I look at my birds, through the window. The high-tech stuff is fun, but you really don't need that to enjoy birds. And when you do have just a feeder, you can see them flitting around in the shrubs and doing their thing, whereas, you know, just the bird feeder cam just shows them eating.
All right, and to watch our Christmas Bird Notes special, you can visit our YouTube channel by searching Across the Fence on youtube.com. And we also talked about the Christmas or winter bird count that you guys were holding. Any big data from that?
Yeah, so again, this is the 125th. By the way, thank you all for coming out.
Oh, thank you for hosting us.
Yeah,
we had a blast.
That was a great show, and with the drone imagery and all that kind of stuff, everybody down at the office really liked it, so it went well. Yes, the Christmas bird count, or as some folks are calling it now, the winter count. This is the 125th year, as we discussed last month. And so it's a count that's been going on a long time now. And today what I thought I would do is talk about some of the more interesting birds. You know, many of these counts, chickadees and nuthatches and, your woodpeckers, cardinals, they're all kind of standard. They get the highest numbers. And so what I thought we would do is talk about some of the other species that are picked up on the Christmas bird count, which people may not necessarily think are around this time of year.
Great. So what do you want to highlight?
So the first one that I was going to talk about was the American robin. We've got a picture here of a savanna sparrow up. That's another one that is a bird that we see during the summer. And this is a bird that has been picked up. The robin, I wanted to highlight that because every year we get questions from people, oh, there's robins and it's winter and are they okay? And robins do really well. Some of the count circles had over 500 robins for one single day. And they take advantage of, as that picture showed, a lot of the berries that are still out there and available. And with a lot of the plantings that go on in and around cities, there's a lot of fruit for them to access. And so robins are here pretty much almost year-round nowadays. So no longer a harbinger of spring, but just another winter resident for us.
Sure, but they're doing all right. It's not.
They're doing all right. Birds can fly, so they can move south if they need to. Pretty quickly. So they can move. Snow depth with robins is often a big thing. If you got a lot of snow, you don't see so much robins.
All right, absolutely. I'm so glad you came in. I would never have known. All right, now let's jump back to the savanna sparrow. Talk about some of the other birds you saw.
So I was saying these are species that we see here in the summer that we don't expect to necessarily see here in the winter. And the savanna sparrow is one of those. A field sparrow. Oftentimes you find it down in in Addison County, in the Champlain Valley, the big field areas. This and things like song sparrows, again, are summer birds. But we do pick them up now and again on, Christmas, winter bird counts. And so that was one that showed up on a number of the Champlain Valley circles. So that was a good one. And then here's one that, winter wren is its name. It's got that nice little sharp tail. And although we call it a winter wren, it is not a bird that we see here often in the winter. But it does show up on a number of counts nowadays, and especially some of the earlier counts. The count season goes from about mid-December to the first week of January. So there can be quite a bit of difference in weather and everything like that. So some of those earlier counts may pick up some birds that you might not see a little bit later on. And then, of course, a warbler, no less. This is the yellow-rumped warbler, the butterbutt. It's usually one of the first warblers to arrive back here in the state, but it was seen on the count this year, and that's always a good one. This is a species that is mostly insectivorous, but can feed on berries as well, juniper berries and such.
Sure, and we have one more that you mentioned in the section, the hermit thrush.
Yes, as you said earlier, our state bird. Again, another bird that we see very commonly in the forests here in the spring and in the summer in Vermont. And we had a couple of counts that picked up hermit thrushes. Again, like the yellow-rumped warbler, it's usually one of the early migrants and one of the last ones to leave. So, there's a bunch of birds that we don't normally think of as winter birds here in Vermont.
So is seeing them more in the winter kind of a changing trend, or is that just, you just don't really think of them?
Yeah, well, we don't think of them, but it very well could be. This year, cold winter, but as winters potentially warm with global warming, we may see some of these species hanging around longer and spending all winter with us.
Sure, and kind of speaking of that, you have some new species that have shown up more commonly on the count. Tell me about those.
So these are species that have popped up over the past decade or so, maybe a little longer, much like the winter wren, except for this big white eyebrow and that much longer tail. This is the Carolina wren. And this is a bird that has shown up recently, was on a lot of the different count circles. It's a bird that comes to people's feeders. It starts nesting in April. And if you see a wren type, bird with that tail up, there's a good chance you're going to be seeing a Carolina wren. This next bird is another bird that people see now more and more. Its range used to be just to the south of us, and it's now expanding north, the red-bellied woodpecker. And it does and can have a reddish belly. It's a little bit confusing because it does have that red head. But this is a bird that, again, is just showing up more and more at feeders. Years ago when I started at the Audubon, and I might have mentioned this when you were out with us, titmice were brand new to us, and now we see them all the time. So these are birds that are adapting to not only weather conditions, but a food supply in the form of feeders and such like that
Sure.
Is available for them.
And that's we have a couple other woodpeckers in town, isn't that right?
Yeah, so again, high numbers of hairy woodpeckers, downy woodpeckers. Good woodpecker is a pileated in the wintertime or a northern flicker. But the hairies and downies kind of dominate the scene.
Yeah, so if you see a woodpecker, it could be a variety of different ones.
It could, yeah. Even yellow-bellied sapsuckers showed up on the counts this year.
Absolutely. And how about you tell me there's a northern mockingbird?
Yeah, so this is another species which is great. If you go down in the mid-Atlantic states, all over the place, mockingbirds are just now starting to pop up here in Vermont. People are seeing more and more of them. They've got those flashy white wings that they'll often extend in your yard. So this is another species that showed up on the count, and more than likely we're going to be seeing more and more of them in the wintertime over the years.
All right, and how about the black vulture?
So this is a good one. This is probably one of our more recent birds. People have been seeing the black vulture in the summertime, low numbers of them, but they see them around. Different from the turkey vulture, which has a red head. The black vulture is black in the head, and its tail is a little bit different. But this was seen on one of the counts, and I'm not exactly sure, but it may be one of the first black vultures seen on the Christmas/winter count. So
wow.
A good bird for those folks that caught that one.
And we're not out of time, but we're running out. So let's get through these so we make sure we hit all of our birds. Yep. So a lot of the time you guys are near a body of water when you do this. Is that a good place to spot?
Oh yeah. So in the count circles, you've got all these volunteers, and the folks that get the lake ones or the river ones in the Connecticut Valley often pull in things like white-winged scoters. This is a good bird, primarily a sea duck. So they show up on Lake Champlain. Another one which we don't see during the summer, but we'll see sometimes in the winter, is the red-throated loon. Very different from our common loon.
Yeah, I was going to say.
It has that little upturned bill there, and this is the winter plumage, so this is how you'll see them out there. And of course, a really good one is the long-tailed duck. a pretty
Wow, look at that tail.
spectacular waterfowl. It gets its name because that long extended tail. So again, a lot of these are in winter plumage. They're not in their bright fancies, but they, folks that are birders that know what they're looking for are keeping an eye out for them.
Yeah, not quite their Sunday best, but still something to see.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so is it a good rule of thumb to stick near the water if you're looking for
If
birds?
you can get on a count circle and you can get a section with, let's say, the Burlington waterfront or areas of Charlotte and Ferrisburg and Heinsberg, you get, and the lake is open, you can often get some really good birds.
Sure, and you've mentioned different groups doing counts. Who are doing these?
A lot of it's volunteers. There's some folks like Sally Laughlin, who's been doing the Christmas bird count in the Woodstock area for years and years. She leads that, organizes the volunteers, gets them set out. So each one of these circles has a count circle lead, which kind of divvies up the responsibilities and collects all the data and submits it.
And when we were on location last month, you mentioned interruptive species. So what does that mean?
So interruptive species, eruptive species, they're species that will pop down into Vermont here and there over the years. Sometimes we see a lot of them, sometimes we don't see a lot of them. And the only one, in looking through the data that had come in that came up, was the pine grosbeak. This is a species that in some years we'll see a lot of. And again, they're eruptive, so they erupt into Vermont, and there may be some years where we don't see any. Redpolls are another species like that. Snowy owls sometimes will, show up in numbers here in Vermont, and it varies by year.
All right, well, we're almost out of time, but I want to mention the gold-crowned kinglet. This is a favorite that you saw this year, right?
So I did the count in Charlotte with some folks, and then I walked around the Nature Center for the Heinsberg count, which includes the center. And chickadees, are woodpeckers, but the golden-crowned kinglet, I was on the backside of the beaver pond, and I had my ears open for it, and sure enough, I found a couple that were flitting around there. So that was kind of it was home and kind of nice to see golden crowns there at the Audubon Center.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I hope this is a little warmer than your usual out in the field bird watching, but it's always great to see you.
Always great to be here.
Absolutely. And if you have a bird-related question, you can pass it along to Mark at the address on your screen, or you can drop Mark an email. His address is mlabarr@audubon.org. You can send Mark your questions and pictures, and he'll try to find the answers for you, or you could be featured on an upcoming edition of Bird Notes. And that takes care of our program for today. We've got to fly, but before we do, my thanks to the hardest working crew behind the scenes here who makes our visits possible. I'm Julie Whitney. This is Across the Fence. Have a good one.